Hey Flinders, welcome to the third and final video in the Building a Good Vibes Plan series. If you haven't seen videos 1 and 2, I strongly recommend starting there, as we're really just going to jump straight in from where we left off in the last video. So in video 2, I started guiding you through the process of developing your own Good Vibes plan. And I introduced you to the Good Vibes Plan worksheet, which looks a bit like this fellow here. And in the last video, we worked our way through pages 1, 2, and 3. On page 1, I talked about the different areas of mental health and got you to think about which of those areas you think you could work on in your own life or would be valuable for you to work on. In page 2, I got you to think about what kinds of activities could you engage in that would meaningfully progress you in one of those areas or help you make improvements in one of those areas. And on page 3, I got you to think about what would you put in place to increase the likelihood that you would actually engage in those activities. So an example of the thinking you might have gone through in that process was, okay, I've decided I want to make better lifestyle decisions, make mentally healthy lifestyle decisions. I'm going to do that by spending more time engaging in some meditative practice. And then in terms of meditation, how am I going to remind myself or get myself to engage in it on a regular basis? Well, I might put some post-it notes on the fridge. I might attach meditation to an existing habit. So I do a couple of minutes of meditation after I brush my teeth or something like that, or a couple of minutes of meditation when I have my cup of coffee out in the garden in the morning. And so by the time we got to the end of that video, really what I wanted you to reflect on was, had you picked activities that made sense in the context of the domains of mental health that you wanted to work on? So again, as an example, if you decided that you really wanted to work on making better lifestyle choices, and then the activities that you chose were like sleep and physical activity and diet, well, then that would be a really good match, right? The activities that you've chosen match the area that you want to work on. But conversely, you might have chosen, for example, I want to feel more socially integrated. Feel as though I could have a greater sense of belonging and improve the quality and connection of the relationships in my life. But then as an activity, you sort of chose doing more creative, solitary pursuits, art or gardening. In which case I would say that's not really a very good match, right? The area of mental health that you want to work on isn't very well matched to the activity that you've picked. Now, it's not that the activity wouldn't necessarily be helpful for you. It's just that what we're looking for, I guess, is some concordance between the activities we've picked to add to our life and the areas of mental health that we're trying to improve on. So what we want to do in this video is continue through with the plan and look at the other elements and other things that I want you to think about when putting a Good Vibes plan together. So let's start with page 4 and what I'm calling attitude or mindset. So we each come to this mental health journey with different sets of beliefs and expectations about the process, what it's going to be like, what we should work on, why, beliefs about ourselves, beliefs about others, beliefs about the science, beliefs about a whole lots of things. And the nature of those beliefs and attitudes that we bring will influence how easy or hard we find the process of putting a Good Vibes plan together and then actually following through with it. So you can kind of consider this, for example, what was the attitude that you arrived at these videos with? So some of you might have been arrived at these videos really keen and ready to make some changes, right? You know that your mental health is worth working on and you're ready to make some changes. You're kind of convinced already and you really just needed sort of the information about how to take the next step. Some of you might have come to these videos a little more cautious or reluctant, like you kind of know that mental health is worth working on, but it's not clear whether this is going to be the process for you. You're not quite sure yet whether you want to make some changes and what those changes would be. Some of you might have come to these videos really not sold on the idea of needing to or having to work on your mental health at this point, and really just seeing whether or not there's something that I could say that would convince you in that process. And then some of you really just may not feel as though you need to do any work on your mental health at this point. Now, to be clear, any of those could be correct, right? There's going to be a bunch of you for whom You don't need to really be doing any work on your mental health at this point in time. You might already be in a good place. You might already have good habits in place. You feel content with your life and the way things are going. Right? In this context, really, this video is more like an academic exercise. You're really seeing whether or not the ideas that I present in here are consistent with what you believe about mental health and how you look after it. Or maybe you're sort of collecting some ideas together for a future you, right? You know, a time in the future where you're not necessarily doing so well, but you'd still like to have a sort of a psychological toolkit for what to do in those situations. But if you have made a decision that investing in your mental health makes sense, it's worth checking what kind of attitudes and mindsets you might be bringing along with you on the ride, I guess. Because some of them are going to be helpful, right? They're going to actually assist you in moving towards your goals and making improvements in the areas that are important to you. And others might be unhelpful in that they'll kind of keep you stuck, or they might even sort of take you backwards, or they'll sabotage the efforts that you're putting in along the way to make these improvements. So I wanted to visit a few of these on page 4, and it's really an opportunity for you to take note of whether any of these are active for you, and if they are, you might need to consider that as part of your good vibes planning. So let's have a look at a few. What I'm doing here is I'm going to contrast what I consider to be an unhelpful mindset with its more helpful sort of antidote, or its more helpful contrasting mindset. So we'll start first with self-compassion versus self-criticism. So many of us fall into the trap of thinking that the more critical we are of ourselves, the more that will motivate us to make changes and to do better next time. In truth, it doesn't seem to hold up particularly well in that way. Self-compassionate people tend to do better at making improvements in their everyday life, responding to mistakes or setbacks or failures. And the reason is self-compassionate people still acknowledge what mistakes it is they've made. They still acknowledge that there's been a failure, and maybe that it was part of the choices that they made or the decisions that they made. But self-compassionate people are likely to be much kinder to themselves in the process. They will recognize that mistakes and failure are simply part of the learning process, that they aren't the first and they certainly won't be the last person to make that kind of mistake, and that it's in the process of being kind of kind and supportive to oneself that you're more likely to try and get back on the horse, or try to fix the situation that we've broken or that we've caused. And a really sort of simple way of thinking about this is that self-compassionate people treat themselves in the same way as they would treat a close family member or friend who is going through a similar situation. So when someone that we love and care about is going through a setback or a failure, we might acknowledge with them the mistake that they've made, or what it is they're going through, or what part they played in it. But we're unlikely, because they're someone that we care about, to be nasty or self-critical or unkind or rejecting in that moment. We'll recognize that they've made a mistake just as many other people have made a similar mistake in the past. Another contrasting set of mindsets which you might have heard about are growth versus fixed mindsets. In a fixed mindset, particularly in relation to mental health, what we're saying is that our mental health is stable and it's not shiftable. So how happy or anxious or depressed or excited or curious I am now is kind of how anxious or excited or happy or curious I'm going to be in the future. Nothing that I do is really going to change that. My mental health is fixed. People with a growth mindset assume that I can change my mental health and well-being. I can shift it through the choices that I make, the decisions that I make, the actions that I take. Now, a growth mindset is actually far more accurate in this context than a fixed mindset. Yes, it can be the case that shifting one's mental health over time can take significant effort and trial and error, with some kind of setbacks and mistakes along the way. But we know from a vast therapeutic literature, We know from a vast prevention literature that it's possible for people to make meaningful changes in their happiness levels, in their contentedness levels, in their feelings of belonging and connection with other people. So ask yourself, when you think about your mental health, do you consider it to be fixed, and that there's really not much point in you trying to push yourself in any of these areas? Or do you consider it to be an area where you could grow, for example, in the same way as you might think you can grow in terms of your education or your university degree? A third contrast set is what I call experimental versus outcomes focused. So I like people to be outcomes focused, and what I mean by that is I like people to have a sense of what it is they're working towards and then work meaningfully towards that. But sometimes we can be really fixated on the outcome that we want. So I'm only successful if I achieve this very specific outcome. Now the problem with that is that any other kind of outcome in that situation is classed as a failure, and then as a result can be significantly demotivating. When we take a more experimental headset, what we're suggesting is that I'm moving in this direction, but I'm really curious to see what happens when I try these different things. The same as a scientist running an experiment in a lab. They have a sense of what it is they're working towards, and they often have a desired outcome. But they're willing to see what actually happens when they try adding chemical A to chemical B, or mixing this in this way, or adding these two things together. So an experimental mindset is one in which we're a bit more open to trial and error, to trying things out, to seeing what outcomes emerge, and seeing whether or not maybe those outcomes that we didn't expect that are actually far better than the ones that we were working towards, or the discovery that the thing that we were working towards wasn't actually going to be the result of the action that we took. Right? We're a bit more open-minded to how things are going to turn out, and as a result, there's many possible, potentially good outcomes that we could achieve on the basis of the actions that we take. A fourth one relates to the standards that we set ourselves. So students, and I consider myself in this category when I was a student, but also consider myself in this category now as well, we often set ourselves very unrealistic standards. We would consider that to be a kind of perfectionism, right? So we want to do well, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to do well. We want to perform well. Again, nothing wrong with wanting to perform well. But if we put our standards at a level that we will never achieve, then essentially we're setting ourselves up to consistently underperform by our own standards. Now, a realistic kind of standard takes into consideration that once you take all other factors into consideration, there's going to be times when I perform really well, and there are going to be times when I don't perform to my best. And that really just what I want to make sure is that I'm moving forwards reliably in the areas that are of relevance to me. So a realistic mindset in this context accepts that there is room to grow, but also acknowledges that seeking perfection and demanding perfection of oneself along the way is going to be counterproductive, is ultimately going to be demotivating. And then the final kind of mindset contrast that I want to make is between playful and serious. Right? So the topic of mental health is serious enough as it is. Like, it's really important that we be working on our mental health and well-being. And it's really important that we take the process seriously in thinking about what it is that we want and what it is we need. What it is we're going to need to do to get there. Right? But a playful mindset reminds us that we can approach the process, at times at least, with fun and play and humor in mind, to try things, to try different things, to engage in some of the activities that we're trying with the people that we care about in a playful and humorous way. The time spent with others, joking around and being silly and taking time away from the more serious aspects of life is just as a legitimate approach to improving our mental health as maybe some of the more intense, serious work that we would do, say possibly in psychotherapy or in another setting like that. So approaching the process of trying different things out to see what works doesn't dishonor the topic, right? It just recognizes that play and fun are important pathways through which we learn and adapt. And you might be able to hear a bird that sets up outside my room on a regular basis, deciding to throw in a few comments along the way as well. Now, the final thing that I'd get you to consider in this kind of page 4 section is it's just a good time to think whether there are any other kind of thinking traps or psychological traps that you fall into regularly that might get in the way of you building and implementing a good vibes plan. So an example from my own life would be, because I'm a mental health professional, because I've trained in this space, I've trained in psychology, I have this kind of underlying belief that my personal good vibes plan must not only be the perfect plan, but I must also implement it perfectly, right? And so I would demand nothing less of myself than perfection in terms of my own plan. Now, that's unrealistic. In many ways, even with the additional education I have in this space, I'm still very much like you in that I really have to just sit and reflect on what are the things that I want in my life and what are some of the activities that I'm going to need to do there. How am I going to tackle the fact that there'll be days that I don't want to do it, days that I won't do it, days when different things like self-critical thoughts or fixed mindset get in the way of that actually happening. And so I have to address that fact that this I'm a professional mindset that can sometimes set in can end up really derailing me from approaching this process in the same kind of fun and playful and experimental way that I might recommend that you do it. Now, if you notice that you've got, and on this page 4, you'll notice I've just put like tick boxes here where you can indicate whether or not this is a distinction that's probably important for you to think about. So, for example, if you tick the self-compassion, self-criticism one, what you're saying is you think it's probably good for you to be mindful of the fact that a more self-critical headset is likely to pop up for you when you're doing this work, and a reminder to yourself that its antidote is self-compassion. Likewise, if you tick this box down here, you're kind of suggesting, well, I think I am prone to setting unrealistic standards for myself, and that could be a barrier to me doing this work. And then you might put something again in this box, another sort of psychological factor or a sort of psychological trap that you fall into that you think might sabotage your efforts in this space. Now, if you do tick any of these, your job really at this stage is just to simply notice them, to recognize that as you take steps towards improving your mental health and adding activities into your everyday life with the intention of improving your mental health, that these mindsets and these attitudes will pop up at some point in time. Now, at the point at which they pop up, they needn't necessarily change what it is you intend to do or how you're going to go about it. But you will need to notice them when they pop up, particularly if there's a kind of mindset or attitude that is going to derail you from this work, that is going to take you away from the plan that you've put in place and take you down a self-critical, fixed, unrealistic standards pathway that means you get taken away from this work. You lose that opportunity to put the things in place that you want to. And so it's really a job of noticing when these different attitudes and mindsets are activated and coming back to your plan, right? Coming back to know, what did I set myself as my goal? What are the things that I wanted to do? I'm going to come back to that. I'm not going to let this emergent attitude take control of the wheel, so to speak. So the next thing I want to look at, the second to last thing we'll look at, is to consider whether there are any significant barriers in your life at the moment that would really get in the way of you putting a plan, not only putting a plan together, but then also implementing that plan. So I've listed a number here. There could be others, so this would be a good page also to list the others. But sometimes, if you think about it, our lives are very complex. They're made up of many interacting threads. There may, and it's very likely that there will be things happening in your life that will make it hard for you to implement the kinds of mental health self-care that you identified earlier. right? And that applies in my life, it applies in the lives of any of the colleagues I work with, it certainly applied in the lives of many students I've met over time. There's often something or some things happening in the person's life that are natural barriers to doing this kind of work. Now, if this is the case, then it doesn't suggest that your good vibes, that doing a good vibes plan is a bad idea. It just suggests that your good vibes plan may need to actually focus on that barrier first before then picking some of the other activities. So the nature of the things that can get in the way fall into a few different kind of groups. So there's some kind of personal psychological stuff, feelings of low self-esteem, not feeling like one's coping strategies are very good, struggling with difficult or powerful emotions. There are kinds of interpersonal barriers, so the nature of the relationships we're in, whether we're a good communicator or not, the extent to which we've kind of found our tribe and our place. There can be occupational type factors, relating to whether we feel competent and what it is that we've got to do, or we've sort of experienced multiple setbacks in terms of achievement, struggling to get into good rhythms. And then there can be some sort of like everyday lifestyle type stuff related to sleep or nutrition or physical health. And your job is to go through and tick any that you think would meaningfully get in the way of you focusing on your mental health at this point in time. So maybe, for example, you've got some significant challenges happening at work, some work stressors, which are taking a lot of time and taking a lot of mental energy. Maybe you've also got some physical health problems, maybe diagnosis of some kind of physical health condition, diabetes or something, a chronic health condition. And you spend a lot of time and effort needing to manage that condition, and therefore the amount of time and mental energy you've got, to focus on your good vibes plan is less and less. If that's the case, what I want you to do is take that particular item and then go back through the system, go back through this system, the worksheet, but use that as the outcome of focus. So rather than, for example, picking an outcome of focus from here, from page 1, you're actually going to pick an outcome of focus based on the barrier. So the philosophy here is that if really one of the main things getting between you and improved mental health is one of these barriers, then your mental health plan or your good vibes plan should focus on removing that particular barrier. So you might focus and spend significantly more time on managing your chronic health condition. Right, so see a doctor or a health professional, learn some better self-management strategies, change the medication that you use, implement some other healthy lifestyle factors that would not only improve that health condition, but would also improve your mental health and well-being. If it's challenges at work, you might decide, okay, I'm going to need to develop a plan and a set of actions that relate to me solving or managing these challenges at work first. And then once I've kind of reduced or eliminated that barrier, then I can go back to thinking about the different areas of mental health that I want to work on. So this is a really important step, because you might have got through to this stage and thought, well, actually, the reason I'm not working on my mental health at this stage is because there's some really big barriers in the way. There's some things happening in my life that are just consuming all my time and energy. And I don't really feel as though I can invest that time specifically in my mental health. In this case, actually, focusing on that barrier is the way that you will invest in your mental health. Okay, and then finally, so it's possible, sometimes maybe even highly likely, that even after going through this process, listening to these videos, that you might still feel lost and unsure about what to do as far as putting a good vibes plan together goes. Now, it's important to note that this is really normal. It's really normal to find this process a bit strange and a bit difficult. We aren't often used to considering our mental health in this way. This feels more like how we might just approach getting an essay done or doing an assignment. It feels more like a to-do list almost. And we don't think of that kind of planning in the context of something as kind of broad and potentially nebulous as our mental health. But it's actually really this notion of planning is central to most of the programs that I've come across in relation to mental health that have any good evidence base. And it's really the core of what we would do with people in individual therapy as well. We would still get them to set goals, to think about what it is they're working towards, to implement new activities and habits, to focus on embedding them in their everyday lives, to removing those core barriers, and to thinking about the attitudes and the mindsets that they bring to work and what impact those might have. We would do that in therapy, and in this context, we're really just getting you to repeat that process here for yourself. So in that context, because people aren't normally used to doing this, you may have found it difficult. Now, if that's the case, then really your job is to work out who you can talk to who can help you get started. Now, if you're a student at Flinders, this might include someone from the counselling team. It might include a trusted family member or friend, someone whose advice you really value or knowledge base you really value. It could be a health professional, a GP, a psychologist, someone that you know or someone that you're willing to go and see. And the core question that you're asking them is, I want to improve my mental health, but I don't really know where to start. And so listen to the advice that these people provide you. And open your mind to the idea and be willing to consider acting on that advice. Now, the advice won't be perfect. Depending on who you talk to, it may be more or less imperfect. But it may be enough to get you started. And in many ways, just getting momentum on this process of looking after one's mental health, getting momentum on the process of thinking about what it is you want and taking specific steps to move towards it is actually what we're trying to get here, because that momentum will start to feed on itself. Now, in that context, there may be some other resources that you will find useful, particularly if you're a Flinders student. The Student Health and Wellbeing blog is a place where I and some of my colleagues and even some student authors write about health and wellbeing with a particular focus on mental health. We've got the Self-Help Self-Care Library. It's a set of documents that help you think about different self-care and self-improvement topics. We've got Oasis Online, which is a topic within Flinders Learning Online flow that directs you. It's like a big directory of all the different mental health and wellbeing supports, services and resources that are in the university. You can scroll through there and see if you can find something that's really well matched to what it is that you need and want at this point in time. And then we've got the Be Well plan, so the program upon which this video series was partially based. You can visit the link in the document and see when the next Be Well program is being run and sign up for that. And for Flinders students, that program is free. And I think there's still a couple left in 2021 where we are now, but there'll be a whole new set in 2022 as well. So let's summarize, take a bit of a moment to think about where we've been. So a Good Vibes plan is a personal strategy for personal psychological growth and for bringing more positive emotion into one's life. Like a fitness plan, it's put together by understanding the domains in which you could or would like to improve, picking specific strategies to make that happen, and then playing with getting those strategies embedded into your everyday life by considering the attitudes that you bring to it, the barriers that you might need to overcome, and the little kind of habit hacks you might need to put in place to make it happen. Now, in this series of videos, 1, 2, and 3, I hope I was able to demonstrate some of the important steps in putting together such a plan. Please feel free to revisit these sessions as you need. Keep the Good Vibes plan worksheet handy, and you can always go back and revisit this and change it, make additions, make notes, seek information on the further resources at the back. But keep this somewhere where you can return to it on a regular basis. A Good Vibes plan is something that will grow with you over time, right? You won't just set the plan as one thing and then just carry that out for the next 40 years. As you start to interact with, or as you start to make changes with your mental health in mind, different opportunities and challenges will show up, and you'll get to modify and adjust your plan as you go. So consider revisiting it, even in a few months, to see whether or not the activities that you've chosen for yourself are working, and taking you towards taking you in the direction that you want to go. Now, also remember to reach out for those additional resources if you're stuck. But otherwise, look, that's it for this series. Thank you so much for watching through. If you've watched through all 3 videos, I hope it was helpful. I look forward to catching up with you at some point in time in a future Be Well Plan session, maybe a future lecture. I do some outreach to different topics. You might see me floating around the university. Please feel free to send me an email if you've got questions about this Good Vibes plan or any of the materials that we create. And otherwise, look, just take care, and I'll talk to you soon.